Hello there. This is Craig Webb of Webb Analytics, back with my March report on what's happening in the economic world that affects lumber and construction supply companies. This is sponsored by ECI. I thank them for their support. Now, you may be wondering why I've got a picture from the Washington Nationals spring training up on the cover slide here. And as I go along, I think you're going to understand why the question of how fast you throw ball four really is going to figure into what's going on in your world. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening right now. In some ways, you could say that life for dealers across the country is kind of so-so. Everybody's expecting better times are going to come. They just haven't come yet. So everybody's sort of waiting anxiously like that dog at the door. If you talk to people at Moody's and other places, you'll see that GDP growth is a little slowing down, but it's still not too bad. Payroll isn't too bad. Inflation is getting better slowly, although the last CPI report was not spectacular. Consumers are spending just enough. What this does indicate is that a lot of people are thinking we're not going to have a recession, even though Zonda puts it at 60%, that we're not going to have a recession. We just aren't going to do very well until we get ourselves rate decreases by the Federal Reserve. Atlanta Fed does something called GDP Now, where they take all the elements that go into the gross domestic product and indicate where things are. You can see that they're only talking about a 2.5% rate this year, 2.3% for the fourth quarter of last year. And the economists are getting a lot better at agreeing with them as to how slow things were compared with previous quarters. The unemployment report, a little bit better than we thought. People are still hiring, people are still building up. And what that's indication that inflation is going to keep dropping without slowing economic growth. Meanwhile, in terms of the supply chain, the belief is that we've had these issues at the Red Sea and the Panama Canal, but imports still are steady. By the way, all of these slides are going to be available from downloads from ECI. In our own particular world, I'm seeing a lot of optimism among roofers, remodelers, builders about consumer demand, as well as their ability to raise prices. That said, sales growth the first half, not going to be too great. Nobody's really expecting anything spectacular. And when you compare what lumber prices have done and how lumber prices have changed, you could see a lot of dealers continue to record declines in their sales year over year for at least the first and the second quarters before things start really getting better. There is still, however, a lot of optimism that things are going to get better in the second half of that year. And even right now, if you were to talk to remodelers, as the Farnsworth Group does, you're going to see that there's relatively decent confidence about getting new business, what their revenue prospects are, how their average revenue is not too, is pretty much constant. And they're booked out more than 2 months in terms of the amount of work. If you talk to people at House and they collect information from December through January, architects, interior designers, other people are all pretty optimistic about their economic prospects, especially if you compare them to how they said they actually did in 2023. So you've got optimism there. Stifel, which is a company that does stock analysis as well as gives financial advice, has done a survey of roofing contractors. For the next 12 months, they're seeing job growth. For the next 12 months, they're saying that their quoting activity is fairly good. They also do a survey of construction materials providers, and you can see that they're talking about higher prices. Now, this is in some ways a good thing because it means more revenue for you. In some ways, it's a bad thing because it's going to have an influence on the consumer price index. And until we get that down, the Fed doesn't act. The window and glass industry, they're feeling pretty good. Their profit margins compared with 22 tended to be up moderately. Their sales expectations for 24 are even higher. So you're seeing this optimism all over. John Burns Research and Consulting, does a kitchen and bath demand meter. They're seeing a turnaround from 2023, but relatively modest growth in 2024. So where are we now? One of the best metaphors I've heard comes from Zonda, where Todd Tomilak says that where we are right now, especially in the repair and remodeling world, is like holding a beach ball underwater. There's all that pressure that tends to be built up. And when you finally get that chance to let go of that beach ball, boy, it shoots up. He believes that it's possible that we're going to think of the last half of this decade as the golden age of remodeling because of all the good things that are going to happen. So here's where he's seeing things go on. If you take the 2023 residential repairs for all sorts of remodels were down compared with previous years. You get into 2024, you see starting in the third and fourth quarter, lots of growth. We're getting positive again. You go into 25 and 26, things continue to stay good. Things continue to keep growing year after year. So in the repair and remodeling world, that may be a good place to go. Now, keep in mind that houses need different things depending on how old they are. The general belief is that the best time that you need repair and remodeling work is when the house is about 40 or 50 years old. So that would be the decade between 1970 and the 1970s and the 1980s. Different parts of the country have different percentages of those homes. For example, Florida only has 4% of the homes were built before 1950, whereas 44% of them in the District of Columbia were. If you were to look at this sort of golden era for which things are going to happen, you would think that that would mainly be in the Northeast, but actually those houses are older than that. They need different kinds of repairs. It's instead places like California, Florida, Arizona that tend to have those kinds of houses. So the Sun Belt actually is in for a remodeling phase as well as a new construction phase. Vendors think retail prices at home centers could drop, and you could see that the Home Depot and Lowe's are not necessarily going to have spectacular years, maybe in mid-single digits. Dealers should probably do better. So what's it going to take to get to that point where people are better? I was on a panel at the International Builders Show with a VP from Home Depot and a VP from James Hardie, and they both talked about the need for you to do special things, show product authority, be aware of what your customers want, focus on cost controls. In other words, operations and how you do things are going to matter as much as actually what you sell or the price with which you sell it. Now, I've been talking a lot about repair and remodeling there, so let's go into new home construction. The February starts numbers aren't out yet. The January ones are showing that we're about a 1 million annual rate for this. And if you talk to people like Zonda, they're actually seeing some good things. They're talking about how a lot of bigger builders are planning on increasing their housing starts by at least 10%. Permits in January were up 43% for single family, down 18.9% for multifamily. Zonda, I think, is predicting about a 3.5% increase in single family and down something over 20% in multifamily. So we're going to start seeing a change. Now, there is a question of how much more housing can go beyond where it is right now. And that's in part because we just don't have enough workers yet. Job openings are still exceeding hires. We've regularly had more. If you talk to people at Evercore ISR, they're even starting to wonder about how many homes that home builders can build because we are short of what's needed. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says we're close to, we have so many job openings that we just can't grow more than our ability to have people do that work. Now, let's talk about pricing for a second. One of the most interesting developments happened just a few days ago when a settlement was reported in which realtors were going to change from a standard of asking for 6%. And that's going to reduce the price of homes if they take a lower commission. And if they take a lower commission, that's going to make houses just a tiny bit more affordable. That could help spur a few sales that we didn't see otherwise. In terms of rent, which is an indicator on whether people are going to try to go buy homes, existing homes or new homes, well, we are now seeing a slight increase in rent for the first time in 6 months. There is a belief that when a lot of homes that were built in 2023, multifamily homes come online, that we are going to see a reduction in rent. But, well, let's wait and see if that's exactly what happens. Meanwhile, on the home builder side, well, they're not thinking the prices are going to drop. 56% of them told Zonda that they think their prices are going to go up 1% and 5%. Another 14% thought a raise of between 5 and 10%. So they're planning on charging more. If they really were in a race with renters in order to get to people, they wouldn't be thinking about that. Now, a lot of you sell primarily to custom builders, and where the custom builder market is something a little harder to measure because it's usually measured about once a quarter. Custom home construction, which is about 20% of all single family starts, went down last year. That's probably in part because of rates on home equity loans and the like. But if the Fed cuts rates this year, you could see home equity loans going down, and that means more chance to take money out of your existing house and use it for the next house. One trend that is probably worth noticing that you're starting to read a little bit more about in the newspapers is changes in average home sizes. And yes, that is happening in most parts of the United States, but if you start looking at various sources, you can see that the average home size change is different depending on where you are in the country. But for most parts of the United States, it is going down. A smaller home means less wood, fewer windows, fewer doors. So even as the number of units you're perhaps doing, the number of home jobs you're handling is going up, the total volume of what you're selling may not be changing quite as much. I suggest you keep an eye on that as you go forward. In terms of lumber, we're not seeing growth in production, according to the president and CEO of Interfor, and he doesn't think we're going to see it for quite a while. Now, we all know that there's a lot more southern yellow pine being produced, but the belief at Interfor is that if you take all the reductions that are going on in British Columbia and the relatively flat production rates in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, as well as Eastern Canada, you don't see much growth at all, and maybe not even keeping up with demand. What does this mean? Well, theoretically, this could mean prices would go up for what's available in North America. I suspect it also could mean that there's going to be more European product coming into the United States, especially if you're a dealer that's located near a port on the East Coast, Savannah, Jacksonville, even in North Carolina, those places. And what's that going to do to prices? Well, even now, with the declines that we've seen, the prices are still above where we were in 2004, 2006. And this is an indexed number. And consequently, we're probably not going to see a plunge in lumber just because the availability is so restricted that demand will be high for what's available. I want to get into a few side notes that are just interesting to know, won't necessarily be direct impacts on the economy right now. One of them was that I had talked a little bit about Barndominiums 2 months ago, and now 7% of builders are telling the NAHB that they actually build them. Now, what is a barndominium? Well, there's various definitions according to what's done. But this could have an impact on some of you in the areas where barndominiums are getting more popular. I suggest you keep an eye on it because it could affect what you sell and what products you make available to customers. We've talked a little bit in the past about how much America is underbuilt. Lots of people have been doing surveys and trying to give an estimate. Stifel did one recently, and they came up with the notion that even though we've had an increase in the amount of starts versus the American population and the immigration, we're still about 3.38 million houses short of what's needed. What makes Stifel a little different is that they actually tried to break it down between multifamily need and single family need. They believe that we're short about 2.66 million single family homes and 736,000 multifamily homes. Depending on where you are, that's going to make a difference. We also saw some interesting research by John Burns Research and Consulting about migration trends. The number of household moves is down, share of household moves within an urban area is rising, that sort of thing. But it really does vary by market. And John Burns had a pretty good slide where you could see lots of different markets are in different parts of the cycle. So you need to be aware of what's going on in your area, even as you read about the national numbers. Now, nationally, 60% of the counties in the United States added people between July 1st, 2022 and July 1st, 2023, but also that variety was great too. Harris County, for example, was one of the fastest growing markets in the country. All but 4 counties in Florida gained population, but then you can see other places such as New York City, California, and the like that have been losing people big time. So, where are we now? I still believe that the mood among dealers that I talk to is positively nervous. And by that, I mean they're feeling good about their own local situation, but at the same time, they keep hearing these stories about problems elsewhere. And I think that the glass is more than half full, and you can feel optimistic about where you're going. You just have to be cautious that sometimes some of these national trends also will turn out to be local trends. So that brings me back to the Washington National sign. The message that they're trying to give the pitchers is that it doesn't matter how fast you are or how busy you are if you're not succeeding operationally. And your job as a pitcher is to strike out the batter. I believe that this year, if you take a modest, slow growing rise in demand and you have limited price hikes, that they're not going to be increasing your revenues or your profits at all. I think that what's really going to matter is better operations, better ways of cutting costs, better ways of delivering things, better ways to provide services that give you just that extra smidgen of margin that you weren't getting before. Operations, I think, are going to matter. How fast you throw a ball four, nobody's going to care about. So that's it right now. I thank you for listening to this. Once again, I thank ECI for making all this available, and I look forward to talking to you again in April. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.